The year was 754, and a deadly silence fell over a camp in Frisia. Inside a tent, a group of men huddled together, reading from sacred texts. Suddenly, a band of robbers burst in, wielding swords. One of the men, an elderly figure with a long beard, tried to defend himself. His hand clutched a gospel book, but it was no match for the sharp blade that struck him down. The man was Boniface, the patron saint of Germany, and his martyrdom marked a turning point in the history of the Christian Church. News of Boniface's death spread quickly, and it sent shockwaves through the Christian world. But this was not just a story of violence and tragedy. It was the beginning of a new era, one where the sword and the book would work hand in hand to spread Christianity across Europe. In the years that followed, a young scholar named Alcuin of York emerged as a key figure in this cultural and religious transformation. Born around 740, Alcuin came from a well-connected family in Northumbria, a region in northern England known for its rich intellectual tradition. His early years were spent in the cathedral school at York, where he showed a remarkable talent for learning. By the age of 10, he had already mastered the Psalms and could recite the works of Virgil, a Roman poet whose writings were highly valued in the medieval world. Alcuin's education was not just about books and texts. He grew up in a world where the lines between religious and military life were often blurred. Clerics like Alcuin were not just scholars. They were also warriors in the service of Christ. This blend of spirituality and martial culture was evident in the way Alcuin spoke and wrote. In one of his letters, he compared Christ to a war leader, urging his readers to stand bravely like standard-bearers in Christ's battle line. York, the city of Alcuin's birth, was a bustling center of trade and learning. High walls and towers surrounded the Roman castrum, and the river flowed through meadows, making it a vital port for both land and sea trade. Alcuin's pride in his city was evident in his writings, where he often praised its beauty and the strength of its people. As Alcuin's reputation grew, he began to attract attention beyond the borders of England. In 781, he traveled to Rome on a mission to collect the pallium, a ceremonial scarf, for the Archbishop of York. On his way back, he had a fateful meeting with Charles the Great, the king of the Franks. Charles, known today as Charlemagne, was a man of immense ambition. He not only sought to expand his empire through conquest, but also aimed to revive learning and culture, a movement known as the Carolingian Renaissance. Charles recognized Alcuin's talent and invited him to join his court as a teacher and advisor. Alcuin accepted, and soon he became a leading figure in the palace school. His teachings and writings had a profound impact on the Frankish elite, helping to shape their understanding of Christianity and the world around them. But Alcuin's influence extended beyond the court. He was part of a network of Anglo-Saxon scholars and churchmen who played a crucial role in the spread of Christianity across Europe. One of these was Willibrord, a missionary who had been active in Frisia, and whose biography Alcuin wrote. Another was Willihad, Alcuin's cousin, who became the first bishop of Bremen and continued the work of Christianizing the Saxons. The story of Alcuin and his contemporaries is a tale of how a small group of dedicated individuals could change the course of history. Through their scholarship, their teachings, and their unwavering faith, they helped to lay the foundations of a new Christian Europe. And it all began with a man who died holding a gospel book in his hands, a symbol of the power of both the sword and the word. In the 8th century, two Anglo-Saxon figures, Boniface and Alcuin, left a significant mark on the cultural and scholarly landscape of Europe. However, their departure from England also had a notable impact on their homeland. According to one historian, the cultural and educational contributions of Boniface and Alcuin to Europe might have contributed to a decline in learning in England. When Boniface took a generation of learned aristocrats to the continent to convert the Germans, it led to a noticeable decline in Southumbrian learning. Similarly, when Alcuin left to serve as Charlemagne, his chief advisor, it marked a clear decline in Latin learning in Northumbrian schools. Many Anglo-Saxons moved abroad for various reasons. Some, like Eadbar, the daughter of King Otho of Mercia, fled in disgrace. Eadbar was known for her poisonous ways and eventually ended up in Pavia, Italy, where she lived in poverty. But for many others, deeper motivations were at play. The anonymous Frankish biographer of Saint Lebuin Leafwine described England as a land of holy men and women who left their homes to spread Christianity, either to atone for their sins or to teach pagans and Christians. This religious zeal was common in those times, and many were inspired by Boniface's call to help convert the old Saxons. Curiosity about foreign lands also drove many to travel. Willibald, a young Anglo-Saxon, was a travel enthusiast who set out to the Holy Land to explore unknown territories. He visited places like Rome, the Holy Land, and Constantinople, and his adventures were recorded by Sister Honeyberg, a nun at Heidenheim. Honeyberg's account, the Hodoporken, is one of the most fascinating travelogues from the Middle Ages. It details Willibald's journey, including his father's death and his own experiences, such as smuggling balsam resin past Arab customs. Honeyberg herself was a remarkable figure. She wrote the Life of Willibald and the Life of his brother Saint Winibald. Her writing style, influenced by the ornate Latin of Aldhelm of Malmesbury, reflects the high quality of education in the monasteries of the time. Another notable Anglo-Saxon was Walburga, who founded the double monastery at Heidenheim. Despite her saintly life, her memory became intertwined with the pagan fertility goddess Waldborg, celebrated on May Day Eve. The career of Ludger, a Frisian who studied under Alcuin in York, illustrates the extensive network of Anglo-Saxon influence. Ludger later established the bishopric of Munster and maintained connections with his former teacher. This network extended to family ties, such as Egbert of Trier and Abbess Matilda of Essen, who traced their ancestry back to English royalty. Ealdorman Ethelwerd, a distant kinsman, wrote a Latin translation of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle for Abbess Matilda, seeking information about their family's history in Germany. The cult of Saint Oswald, a Northumbrian king, also spread across the continent. His legend was popularized through various works, including the Oswald Spilmensepic, a minstrel's epic written in the 12th century. Hrotswitha of Gandersheim, a nun and playwright, claimed that Emperor Otto I's wife, Edith, was a descendant of Oswald, further cementing the saint's influence. Alcuin, a key figure in the Carolingian Renaissance, played a crucial role in fostering connections between England and the continent. He founded the pilgrim hostel of St. Judoc's near Quentovic, which became a meeting point for English travelers. Alcuin's influence extended to the network of confraternities, where monks and bishops would pray for each other. For example, King Ethelbert II of Kent wrote to Boniface, asking him to remember a saintly kinswoman in his prayers and offering valuable gifts in return. The hostel of St. Judoc's continued to serve as a hub for Anglo-Saxon travelers. When King Ethelwulf of Wessex and his son, the future King Alfred, traveled to Rome in 855, they were warmly received at St. Judoc's. They were then escorted to the court of Charles the Bald, where they exchanged gifts and were provisioned for their journey. Ethelwulf's generous offerings at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome included a gold-encrusted sword and a 4-pound gold crown, showcasing the wealth and influence of the West Saxon monarchy. Alcuin's advisory role in the Frankish court further solidified the ties between England and the continent. He returned to England in 786 and 790, where he attended church councils and kept in touch with events back home. His letters, such as those criticizing King Eardwulf for his marital indiscretions, highlight his ongoing influence and moral authority. The legacy of Anglo-Saxon missions and the cultural exchanges they fostered continued to shape the religious and scholarly landscape of Europe for centuries. The bonds formed during this era created a network of support and mutual respect that transcended national boundaries. Alcuin, the man behind the Carolingian Renaissance, was not known for groundbreaking philosophical ideas. He was, however, a master of Latin grammar and literature, which made him the perfect fit for the times. King Charles, later known as Charlemagne, was more interested in scholars who could help revive and preserve classical learning than in philosophers who might challenge existing beliefs. Alcuin's expertise in Latin and his deep knowledge of Roman theology and church liturgy made him an invaluable asset to the king's educational and cultural programs. Alcuin's journey to the Frankish court was a natural progression. His familiarity with courtly manners, combined with his scholarly skills, quickly earned him a prominent position at the palace school, which soon became known as the School of Master Albinus. The school was a melting pot of young nobles, the king's children, and sometimes even the nobles themselves. Charles, despite never learning to read or write, often attended classes to listen to the lessons, particularly those given by the Italian grammarian Peter of Pisa. The Frankish court, though often dismissed by the sophisticated Byzantines as a semi-barbarian encampment, was a hub of cultural revival. Charles, whose empire stretched across much of the former Roman territories in Europe, brought together scholars from various backgrounds to revive Latin and classical learning. Among these scholars were the Italian Paulinus of Aquileia, the Spanish Theodulf, and the Lombard Paul the Deacon. Paul, in particular, had a fascinating history. After a brief rebellion against Charles, he was brought to the court and later retired to Monte Cassino, where he wrote the History of the Lombards, a work that gave the Lombards a sense of national identity, much like Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People had done for the English. Alcuin's influence extended beyond the classroom. He had a playful side, assigning nicknames to his royal pupils and colleagues. For example, he called his English pupil H. Vita Candidus, meaning white, and the king's daughter Retruda was known as Columba, meaning dove. Even the king's sister, Princess Gisela, was given the nickname Lucia. These nicknames were not just playful, they were a sign of the close-knit and informal atmosphere at the court. Alcuin's nicknames for his friends and pupils, like Nathaniel, for the straightforward Fredigisus, and Homer, for the poet Engelbert, revealed his deep bonds with those around him. One of Alcuin's most important roles was as a literary and cultural advisor to King Charles. He was in constant communication with the king, often by letter, and their relationship was marked by a mix of respect and familiarity. Alcuin's letters to Charles, who was often referred to as King David in the court, show a keen mind and a deep commitment to the king's educational and cultural goal. In one letter, Alcuin thanks Charles for having a book he sent read and corrected, highlighting the king's active engagement in scholarly pursuit. Another letter reveals the king's curiosity about the movements of the planets, a subject that Alcuin, though not an expert, was willing to explore to satisfy the king's thirst for knowledge. Alcuin's influence also extended to the broader cultural landscape of Europe. His circle of scholars, including Candidus and Fredigisus, played a crucial role in the Carolingian Renaissance. Candidus, for example, may have been the author of an important philosophical text known as the Munich Passages, which suggests he was a leading thinker of his time. Alcuin's teachings and influence reached far beyond the court, shaping the educational practices at places like Fulda and influencing later scholars like John Scotus Erigena. Despite his influential position, Alcuin was not above criticism. He was known to speak out when he felt it was necessary, such as when he wrote a strong letter to Charles about the imposition of tithes on newly conquered territories. Alcuin argued that the 10% tax on agricultural produce and income, intended for the church, could lead to resentment and rebellion. He urged the king to prioritize the spiritual well-being of his subjects over financial gain. Alcuin's legacy is also evident in his contributions to the liturgical and musical traditions of the church. He insisted on the use of the Roman rite in church services, and set new standards for the accuracy and discipline in the performance of liturgical music. His passion for rhetoric and eloquence led him to write a treatise linking the art of speech with effective leadership, a work that influenced many scholars of the Carolingian age. In his later years, Alcuin became the abbot of St. Martin's at Tours, a position that brought him significant wealth and influence. Despite the criticisms from some jealous colleagues, Alcuin continued to work tirelessly, even as his health began to decline. He focused on revising the Latin Bible, known as the Vulgate, and improving punctuation, which he believed was crucial for the clarity and style of written texts. Alcuin's impact on the Carolingian Renaissance was profound. He helped shape the educational and cultural landscape of Europe, leaving a lasting legacy that would influence generations to come. His work at the Palace School and his contributions to the broader cultural revival of the Carolingian era ensured that his name would be remembered as one of the key figures in the rebirth of classical learning in medieval Europe. In the early 780s, the scriptorium at Tours was a bustling place. Under the watchful eye of Alcuin, a renowned scholar, scribes were busy copying the new Bible. This Bible, which reached England by the 820s, was part of a larger effort to improve church and society within the Frankish Empire. Charles the Great, the king, had issued a document called the General Admonition, in 789, which outlined guidelines for better church practices. Alcuin's influence is evident in this document, both in its language and content. One of the key instructions was that only trained adults, not young boys, should be entrusted with copying important texts like the Gospels or service books. The scribes used a beautiful and clear writing style called Carolingian minuscule, which later inspired some of the best early printing types. Alcuin was not just a supervisor, he was a designer and organizer. He ensured that the books were well designed and easy to read, and he made sure that copies were distributed to monasteries and cathedral churches across the empire. Among his students were two young Germans, Einhard and Rabanus. Einhard, born in 770, entered the school at Fulda at the age of 9. After graduating in 791, he joined the palace school where Alcuin taught, and he later wrote a famous biography of Charles the Great. Einhard remembered Alcuin as a man of vast knowledge, and his education was deeply influenced by the English traditions that Alcuin had brought to the Frankish court. Rabanus, born around 780, was also a student of Alcuin. He spent a year or two at Tours before returning to Fulda, where he became the director of the monastic school. Under his leadership, Fulda became a leading center of learning in the German world. The library at Fulda, much like the one at York, was a treasure trove of books. Rabanus, like Alcuin, wrote extensively, and his work on grammar drew heavily from earlier scholars like Priscian, Alcuin, and Bede. One of Rabanus's significant contributions was his use of the vernacular, or the common language, in church services. This was inspired by the earlier efforts of Boniface, who had insisted that priests should use the local language when teaching the faith. This approach made the church more accessible to the people, and helped spread the teachings of Christianity more effectively. During Rabanus's time at Fulda, a long religious epic called Der Heiland, meaning the Savior, was written in Old Saxon. This epic retells the story of Jesus Christ in a way that would resonate with the Old Saxon people. Jesus is portrayed as a warrior king, and his disciples are depicted as loyal followers, similar to the relationships described in the Anglo-Saxon epic Beowulf. However, the peaceful and scholarly world of Fulda and other monasteries was about to be disrupted. In June 793, the Vikings attacked the monastery at Lindisfarne, a remote and vulnerable site on the coast. This event, which caused Alcuin great distress, marked the beginning of a new era of violence and destruction. The Vikings, known for their dragon-prowed ships, targeted monasteries and other wealthy institutions, pillaging and burning as they went. The impact of these raids was devastating. Monasteries like Monkwearmouth Jarrow, known for their fine manuscripts, were severely damaged. The Viking raids disrupted the cultural and educational progress that had been made in the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The relics of St. Cuthbert and the great Gospel book at Lindisfarne survived the attack, but many other treasures were lost. The monastery's book shrine, adorned with gold and precious stones, also escaped the raiders, suggesting that it was well protected. Despite the initial shock and destruction, life at Lindisfarne continued. The surviving monks buried their fallen brothers and began the difficult task of rebuilding. For the local people, the immediate impact of the raid may have been limited, but the broader cultural impact was severe. The 9th century saw a decline in the great churches and merchant centers of England, as the Vikings' raids intensified. The Viking ships, with their distinctive dragon heads and clinker-built design, were the key to their success. These ships could navigate both the open sea and the rivers, allowing the raiders to strike deep inland. The Vikings' reputation as fearsome warriors was well deserved, and they often achieved surprise by using the rivers to reach their target. In 860, a large Viking force even attacked Winchester, a city 12 miles inland, but was repelled by a combined force of local defenders. The Vikings' activities were not limited to raiding. They also settled in conquered territories, such as the Danelaw in England and Normandy in France. These settlements changed the landscape and culture of the regions they occupied. The Vikings brought with them their own traditions and practices, but they also adapted to the local customs over time. In Ireland, the Vikings established settlements in Dublin, Wexford, Cork, and Limerick. They often engaged in trade, and sometimes even served as mercenaries for local kings. However, their presence was not always welcome, and they faced resistance from the Irish people. The monastery at Clonmacnoise, for example, was attacked multiple times by both Vikings and Christian forces. The Viking raids and settlements had a profound impact on the Anglo-Saxon and Irish worlds. They brought violence and destruction, but they also led to cultural exchange and new ways of life. The legacy of this era is complex, but it is clear that the Vikings played a significant role in shaping the medieval world. The story of England in the 9th century is one of relentless struggle against a fierce and relentless enemy, the Vikings. These sea raiders, hailing from the north, brought terror and destruction to the shores of Britain, leaving a trail of ruined towns, shattered lives, and a landscape scarred by war. King Ecgbert of Wessex, who by 830 had extended his power over much of southern England, faced the first major Viking incursion with a force of 35 ships landing in Somerset. Despite initial victories, the threat only grew. His son and grandsons would face almost yearly attacks, with places like Southampton, Winchester, and London suffering greatly. In 851, a massive Viking fleet of 350 ships sacked London and defeated a Mercian army. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the heroic victory of Ethelwulf of Wessex and his sons at Aclea, but the victories were few and far between. In 865, a turning point arrived with the arrival of the Great Heathen Army, led by Ivar the Boneless and his brothers. This was not just a band of raiders, but a well-organized force with a clear strategy. They wintered in East Anglia, where they were given horses, and then launched a series of devastating campaigns. By 866, they had captured York, ending the independent kingdom of Northumbria. The following year, they moved into Mercia, and by 869, they had conquered East Anglia, killing King Edmund, who would later be venerated as a saint. The Danes then turned their attention to Wessex, the last major Anglo-Saxon kingdom. In 871, King Ethelred and his brother Alfred won a significant victory at Ashdown, but this was followed by a series of defeats. When Ethelred died, Alfred, at the young age of 21, became king. He faced a daunting challenge, with the kingdom's resources stretched thin and the Danes capable of reinforcement at any moment. In 875, the Danes split their forces, with Halfdan moving north to the River Tyne and Guthrum marching to Cambridge. This allowed them to launch a surprise attack on the royal burh of Wareham in Dorset, a fortified site that should have been a strong defensive position. The capture of Wareham was a stark reminder of Wessex's vulnerability, but Alfred was not one to give up easily. He understood that to survive, Wessex needed a new strategy. He began to build a network of fortified towns, or burhs, and raised a standing army capable of rapid response. He also developed a navy to challenge the Danes on the seas. These measures would prove crucial in the years to come. The battle for England was far from over, but Alfred's determination and strategic vision offered a glimmer of hope. In the years that followed, he would face many more challenges, but his efforts would lay the foundation for the eventual unification of England and the establishment of a strong, centralized kingdom. The 9th century was a time of great turmoil, but it also saw the emergence of a hero who would be remembered for generations to come. Alfred the Great, through his leadership and resilience, would not only defend his kingdom, but also pave the way for a new era in English history.